In this video lesson, we shall study the poem I Have My Father's Voice by Chris van Wyk. This poem is part of the 2020-2021 Grade 12 English Home Language curriculum of the Independent Examinations Board. Consider the photograph that I have selected for the title slide. What do you see? What do you think is the relationship between these two men? What do you make of the distance between them, the separation? When you have finished studying the poem, come back to this picture and reconsider your answers. The poem was written by renowned South African writer Chris van Wyk, one of the so-called Soweto poets, whose work was prolific during the years of apartheid. He was born at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto in 1957. He experienced firsthand the tyranny of the apartheid regime when his family was forced to move to a new area under the Group Areas Act. Rivoli in Johannesburg, a suburb for coloured people, became his home. It was here that Van Wyk gathered material for his future writing career. He was a keen observer of human nature and was able to capture the inhumanity of those times in gentle and often humorous writings and reflections. The poem that we are about to study is taken from an anthology entitled It Is Time to Go Home, for which Van Wyk was awarded the Olive Schreiner Prize. Van Wyk's experiences of a divided South Africa, especially after the Soweto protests of 1976, inspired much of his writing. His approach or style was far gentler than those of his peers. His passion was storytelling and the advocacy of literacy. His works cover a wide variety of genres: children's stories, biographies, poetry, short stories, and novels. This prolific writer is a treasure of the South African literary canon. I do hope that some of you saw the excellent one-man show, The Storyteller of Rivoli, at the Market Theatre in Johannesburg. It was written and performed by Zane Mears of Seven de Laan fame. The production honoured this giant of the South African arts world. If you're still looking for books to read for the 7-book oral assessment, I recommend these 2 memoirs written by Chris van Wyk. Both memoirs are written in the easy, conversational, and humorous style that are hallmarks of his writing. Either of these books will give you valuable insight into the relationship that Van Wyk had with his father, which is what this lesson's poem is all about. Turn to your text of the poem. You will find it on pages 97 to 98 of Clusters. I have my father's voice. When I walk into a room where my father has just been, I fill the same spaces he did, from the elbows on the table to the head thrown back, and when we laugh, we aim the guffaw at the same space in the air. Before anybody has told me this, I know, because I see myself through my father's eyes. When I was a pigeon-toed boy, my father used his voice to send me to bed, to run and buy the newspaper, to scribble my way through matric. He also used his voice for harsher things, to bluster when we made a noise, when the kitchen wasn't cleaned after supper, when I was out too late. Late for work on many mornings, one sock in hand, its twin an angry glint in his eye, he flings dirty clothes out of the washing box, vests, jeans, pants, and shirts shouting anagrams of fee, fo, fi, fum, until he is up to his knees in a stinking heap of laundry. I have my father's voice too, and his fuming temper, and I shout as he does. But I spew the words out in pairs of alliteration and an air of assonance. Everything a poet needs my father has bequeathed me, except the words. If you are unfamiliar with any of these terms, I suggest that you pause the video and look them up. It will greatly aid your understanding of the poem. This is my preferred method when analyzing a poem, using subheadings to organize my thoughts after the first reading. I encourage you to do the same. Some of you might be familiar with the soapstone approach to analyzing a text. The acronym stands for S, who is the speaker of the poem. O, what is the occasion, that is, the time and the setting of the poem. A, who is the intended audience of the text. P, what is the purpose of the text. S, what is the subject or general topic of the poem. And tone, what is the author's attitude towards the subject. You should find textual evidence to support your responses. Let's get into the poem. The title is important. It is a statement in which the speaker tells us that he recognizes a similar characteristic in himself and his father. We can tell that the poem is going to be an exploration of the father-son relationship, an exploration of identity. One of the linguistic features of this poem is the change in tenses. In the first stanza, the verbs are in the present tense. Most verbs are preceded by the personal pronoun I have, I walk, I fill, I know, I see. The focus is now, on the speaker, the son. It is his point of view. The poem is autobiographical. The speaker, the poet himself, reflects on the way his childhood molded him. He acknowledges the similarities between himself and his father. The two men have the same mannerisms, the way they sit with their elbows on the table, the way they throw their heads back when they laugh, Even the raucous sound of their laughter is similar. Despite being from different generations, the two occupy the same spaces, the same air. The reflection engages the senses of sound, sight, and touch. It's a visceral response to the memories. The register is colloquial. The structure of the poem is fairly disorganized, reflecting the randomness of memory and recollection. The lack of rhyme scheme and rhythm contributes to the sense of fragmented memories. In the second stanza, the tense changes to the past as the speaker remembers his childhood. The repetition of the infinitive form of verbs serves to create a list of oft-repeated instructions or orders issued by the father. The memory of an awkward, pigeon-toed young boy and a matric student scribbling his way through his schoolwork is affectionately light-hearted. The speaker remembers being ordered around by his father to bed, to the neighborhood shop to buy the newspaper, to do his homework. These memories are somewhat self-deprecating, as the speaker portrays himself as an awkward youth with a less than stellar academic career at school. I'm sure that you can identify with this, as many of us were raised in strict homes where we were expected to be at the beck and call of our parents. Stanza 3 continues in the past tense. In stanza 2, the infinitive form of the verb is used to list the chores of the son. Here, the infinitive form is reserved for the father's reactions when the children are noisy or slip up with their responsibilities. The father blusters, a verb that implies that he's more bark than bite. This stanza shows a development. The father reacts to events that are more serious than the previously mentioned mundane routines of most households. The father has taken the speaker to task from when he was a pigeon-toed boy to when he was a matric student to when he went out at night and apparently returned after curfew. Although these recollections cannot be considered warm or loving, the tone is nostalgic as the speaker remembers his interactions with his father over the years. A father blustering is not too frightening a figure of authority. The memories are of a comical man rather than an angry man. As readers, we wonder if some of the harsher things are events or happenings that took place outside the home. Because of the time and setting in which this poem was written, it's not too much of a stretch to assume that politics and apartheid have an influence over the family dynamics. There is an immediacy in stanza 4, where the tense is again in the present. Strong verbs are used to show the father's anger as he flings laundry items around and shouts with frustration. The tone in stanza 4 also changes, evolves from nostalgia to frustration. The father is late for work, many mornings. You should see the irony here. The father was irritated when his son came home late, yet he is guilty of this too. The alliteration of the and sh sounds emphasizes the frantic chaos of these work mornings. We've all been there, running around looking for an item of clothing as an impatient family member threatens to leave without you if you don't get your act together. And we've all experienced that Bermuda triangle of the laundry basket into which single socks disappear. The father is understandably angry as he has to search through the dirty clothes, the stinking heap of laundry. It is the father who is angry, but it is the shirts that are shouting. Not quite a transferred epithet, this personification serves to exaggerate the chaos of the moment. There is also a deliberate ambiguity with the word angry. Is it the missing sock that is angry, or the father? The father evokes memories of the children's story, Jack and the Beanstalk. In the story, the scary giant would chant fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. The allusion to this tale is amusing, especially when one considers what anagrams of fee, fo, fi, fum means. It's clear that in his anger, the father uses expletives, and we are all sadly too familiar with the F-bombs routinely dropped out of the mouths of angry people. The son watches and learns from the father's actions. In the fifth stanza, the son, the speaker, recognizes that in a number of ways he is just like his father. He too is short-tempered and prone to using his voice. This is the theme of the poem, and you should consider what it means when you find your voice, figuratively speaking. Is this how Van Wyk found his voice? In writing. Stanza 6 starts with the conjunction but, indicating a change, a contrast to follow. The speaker says that his words spew from his mouth. This is a very strong verb. We understand that the speaker has little control over his words, as they are ejected from his mouth in a rapid and forceful manner. It's as though he cannot help himself. But instead of using expletives, swearing, the speaker uses literary techniques, such as alliteration and assonance, to express himself. Both men suffer frustrations. Both give voice to this anger, but in individual ways. The speaker acknowledges that he is indebted to his father. He owes his father for instilling in him a recognition of things that anger him. The speaker, it appears, is able to channel this anger in a controlled manner. His father exposed him to the raw emotions, which he is able to capture eloquently in his writing. His father's anger, his voice, is a gift to the son. The poem is then a tribute to Van Wyk's father, a flawed man who unconsciously taught his son to use the emotions in a constructive manner. There is both sympathy and respect for the father. Van Wyk uses the poem to comment on the process, the discipline required to write. His diction is simple and uncluttered. The writing, with its lack of elaborate figures of speech, is masterful in its simplicity. Some critics have suggested that the poem is accusatory in tone, blaming the father for strife in the home. Do you think that that's a justifiable view of the poem? Right, time for some questions. My students have the questions printed on the lesson plan. The rest of you can pause the video as you write your answers in your poetry notebooks. Remember that your examiners are looking for detailed answers with relevant textual evidence. You know about P paragraphs, petal and Peter paragraphs. What about race paragraphs? These acronyms are a useful method to structure your answers in such a way that you write enough valid information to satisfy the mark allocation. If you aren't familiar with race answers, pause the video and write down the acronym and the accompanying notes. Here are your 5 questions. Pause the video until you have finished writing down the answers. Feel free to look over your annotations of the poem, and if you can, discuss your answers with a classmate. Hearing someone else's opinion on an answer will help to broaden your own outlook on the poem. The answers follow after this slide. Seriously, pause the video. Don't take the easier, quicker option. In question 1, make sure that you read carefully and take evidence from the first stanza only. There are other similarities between father and son mentioned in the poem, but you are instructed to find examples in stanza 1. Be methodical in this question, to which you should have written a fairly lengthy answer. Quote the words and phrases that convey the father's anger and analyze them one by one in detail. Here, you are not just being asked about the meaning of the word to. You are being asked to comment on its effect, to understand the value that it adds to the poem, as the son realizes that he is more like his father than he imagined. Whenever a stanza or line starts with but, you know that a contrasting thought is being introduced. Look out for these words. In this category, you'll include words such as yet, except, and although. The brevity of the last line is the obvious feature. It is significant that the last word of the poem is words, the tools of Van Wyk's trade as a wordsmith. He has what his father lacked, the ability to give voice to his emotions, his frustrations, his anger. You know that in the exam, a poem can be paired with a different medium. What are the links between this poem and these images? You have on the left a father depleting himself in order to make his son whole. Bottom middle is a quote from Chris van Wyk. Does this poem make you want to laugh and cry at the same time? What about the two brains, where adult and child are connected? or the cartoon showing the son following in his father's footsteps? And finally, do you think the photograph of the harassed father struggling with household chores is an accurate representation of this poem? As you expand your knowledge of poetry, and as you prepare for the unseen poetry question in your final exam, I recommend that you watch Chris van Wyk reading his poem, My Mother's Laughter. You can find it on YouTube, posted by SA History Online. It is an interesting foil to I Have My Father's Voice. 2 poems, 2 parents, 2 points of view about parent-child relationships, captured by one of the greats of South African literature. Well, that's another poem completed. I hope you found this video lesson beneficial. I encourage you to subscribe to the Mrs. M Teaches English YouTube channel so that you are notified as soon as I post lessons that you can use to prepare for your end-of-year exams. Thank you for watching, everyone. Goodbye.